The accepted narrative describes the Knights Templar as humble warrior monks protecting Christians on the road to Jerusalem. The Knights were later betrayed and ultimately destroyed. But there is another story within that story. It's a legend filled with murder, mystery, and buried treasure, and it involves a secret powerful enough to rewrite history and change the world. Yes, the Templars were in Jerusalem protecting Christians, but that was their cover story. The real reason they were there was they were looking for something, ancient technology. So as soon as the Knights Templar arrived in the Holy Land, they started digging. And then yeah, I know, Seymour, but it's only for a couple of days.
Human, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I need some cash.
Well, hello to you too.
No time for chit-chat. Gertie wants to go to St. Bart's for Valentine's Day.
St. Bart's?
It's a Caribbean island.
I know what it is. Isn't it like $1,700 a night?
Whatever my baby wants, my baby gets. Anyway, the Beavers and I are starting a business, and I need a little money to get going. And that's where you come in, human.
No way. How many times do I have to tell?
Hear me out. I'm having a hard enough time making my monthly credit card payments as it is. Then there's gas, hump supplies, camel chow. You've seen how much Gertie eats. It's fine, baby. I don't mind a little junk in the hump. Anyway, I can't keep up. I just need a teeny, tiny, weeny, teeny, tiny investment. Say, 40 G's.
40,000?
Okay, 45.
Absolutely not.
Oh, come on, you'll love this new business. It's called Beaver Box. We ship wood and wood products. For Valentine's Day, the Beavers are knowing custom wood-shaped heart pins. You wear it for your significant other, family, friends, whoever. Right now, I got a heart on for you.
Did you say you have a heart on?
Yeah?
Yeah, you
What?
probably want to change the...
Look, people are gonna be buying these wood heart pins like crazy. Everyone you love can have a heart on.
Please stop saying it.
Saying what?
Look, why don't you just have PDS take care of your debt?
Oh, I think you just shimmied your way into today's sponsor.
I sure did. PDS has options for anyone struggling with a lot of monthly debt payments. Credit cards, personal loans, collections, medical bills. Everyone with over $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies.
Well, if I had good credit, I wouldn't be bugging you for a loan.
Well, there's no minimum credit score required. Good and fair credit is accepted. They roll your debt into one low monthly payment. You can save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time.
I am liking the sound of this.
PDS is also giving our qualified viewers a free debt analysis just for completing the 30-second online assessment at www.pdsdebt.com/files.
pdsdebt.com/files.
You got it.
Well, this sounds perfect. I'll sign up after the Beavers are done filling the beaver boxes with wood.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable the way... Wait, where are you getting the wood?
Oh, there was a bunch of it in the garage. The Beavers say it's delicious.
That's the new hardwood flooring for the kitchen.
Well, I'm sorry. Beaver's gonna beaver. From now on, you just let me know anytime you get wood.
My wife's gonna kill me.
Oh, don't worry about it. Once she sees these pins, she'll forget you. You know what? I'll have the boys carve an extra large pin for you to wear. That way, when she gets home, you'll have a huge heart on for her.
The Knights Templar were formed in 1118. At least that's when they were officially formed. The real story began many years earlier in Constantinople, now Istanbul.
Istanbul was Constantinople, now it's Istanbul. Now Constantinople been a long time gone. Constantinople, but a Constantinople get the works. That's nobody's business but the Turks. What? Tell me that song didn't pop into your head the second you said it.
No, it did, but do you mind if I...
Istanbul.
The Brothers of the East was a secret order formed in Greece that eventually set up their headquarters in Istanbul. They practiced alchemy, they studied sacred geometry, they performed rites and rituals incorporating astrology, astronomy, music, and mathematics. So when Hugh de Paynes, a French nobleman, met the Brothers of the East, he was excited. De Paynes was technically Catholic, as most of Europe was, but he had family members who were of the Sufi Islamic faith, which is the more mystical side of Islam. DePaynes had been told of this secret group that possessed and was protecting ancient knowledge. He wanted to meet this group and see for himself. At this time in history, Europe was in chaos. Various kingdoms were rising and falling and warring with each other. In the East, Muslims and Christians were clashing. The world was tearing itself apart, yet the brothers of the East possessed a peaceful wisdom. They weren't concerned with modern politics. The brothers had a purpose that was much more important. Once mutual trust was established, the brothers of the East told the European visitors their story. Well, not their story, the story. It was the story of an ancient civilization that thrived thousands of years ago. The people were highly spiritual and highly advanced. It was a civilization that was free of poverty. Wealth was meaningless. They devised methods of growing crops so that every citizen was fed. They could control the weather. Droughts and famine were impossible. To Hugh DePaynes, this civilization had abilities that sounded like miracles or like sorcery. They could communicate over long distances instantly somehow. They had a way of levitating objects no matter how large or how heavy. They had medicine that could cure any illness, allowing people to live very long lives. War didn't exist. There was such an abundance of resources that anyone can have whatever they wanted. And what these people wanted most was to pursue their own spirituality. And then they were gone. How, DePaynes asked, could a civilization this powerful, who seemed to be able to control nature itself, be suddenly wiped out? The brothers of the East said in a single day the ground shook and volcanoes emerged and erupted. Then a giant flood swept over the earth and destroyed everything.
I know where this is going.
It was then that Hugh DePaynes and his 8 knights learned of Atlantis.
Yahtzee!
Hugh DePaynes and his fellow knights were riveted by the story. DePaynes was a nobleman, a count in fact. He was the Count of Champagne.
La Mouette Champagne. Oh, pardon my French.
DePaynes was an educated man. He knew about Plato and his stories of the island of Atlantis. He thought they were just stories. The brothers said Plato was mostly correct, but Atlantis wasn't just a city or even just an island. It was a civilization that spanned the globe, and each city was connected using transportation technology that again sounded like magic. The story became almost overwhelming. Almost. The brothers said that ancient relics of Atlantis still exist, and they still possess their power. The power to travel great distances, the power of communication, the power to heal, perhaps even the secret to immortality. If ever discovered, these artifacts would be the most powerful and dangerous devices on Earth. DePaynes said that any kingdom, any country, any religion would kill to have access to this power. The brothers of the East agreed. The technology of Atlantis could not fall into the wrong hands. So Hugh DePaynes was offered an assignment: find the ancient artifacts and bring them back to Europe for safekeeping. Hugh and the other 8 men immediately agreed and formed a secret fellowship. But where do they start looking? The brothers said they'll find artifacts under the location of what used to be King Solomon's temple, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The knights would have to act quickly. The Holy Land was a dangerous place. Jerusalem was taken by Christian crusaders in 1099, but who knows how long they could hold it. And there was another problem. It wasn't just the knights that knew about the artifacts. Groups of Christians, Jews, Muslims, they were searching too. So when the knights arrived in the Holy Land in 1120, they set up their headquarters where Solomon's temple once stood. They officially became known as Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar. And the knights played the role of courageous warrior monks, protecting Christians making the long pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But while some Knights Templar guarded Jerusalem, other knights were digging beneath it. Day and night they dug, until one day they struck gold, literally. The Brothers of the East were right. They promised the Knights Templar that if they dug under the Temple Mount, they would find artifacts that once belonged to the great civilization of Atlantis. The Knights found a large box made of acacia wood and gold. There was no question they had found the legendary Ark of the Covenant. And then they found 5 more. Year after year, the Knights Templar pulled treasures from beneath Jerusalem. They found the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail, the Emerald Tablet, and pages of ancient esoteric wisdom. They learned there were 10 arks, though they only found 6. The arks were used in conjunction with pyramids around the world to create limitless energy. This was similar to what Nikola Tesla attempted at Wardenclyffe Tower. If you want to learn how this technology worked, we have an episode that explains scientifically how the Great Pyramid of Giza could have been a power generator.
Pyramid link below.
Within the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid is a stone box. Mainstream Egyptology says this box is a sarcophagus to store a mummy, but no mummy was ever found there. And the dimensions of the box are kind of small for a human body, but the box is the perfect size to store one of the arks. The Knights Templar discovered that the pyramids were built for one specific purpose, to store the arks. And the arks, they were built to store manna. In the Bible, manna was a food source that appeared to the Israelites in the desert. It's described as fine flakes that look like frost on the ground. But according to Templar tradition, the Israelites and the Atlanteans before them extracted manna from plant and animal matter and turned it into a monoatomic white powder. This white powder provides energy.
A white powder that provides energy? New York in the 80s was wild, eh?
You're thinking about something else. The manna acted as an electrical superconductor and powered the arks inside the pyramids. The arks generated unlimited energy for the thriving civilization. They learned these alchemical secrets from none other than the Emerald Tablet.
Emerald Tablet link below.
The Emerald Tablet gave detailed instructions on extracting manna from animal bones. The manna could then be used for energy or even for healing illness.
Hey, didn't the Emerald Tablet also tell you how to become immortal by making the Philosopher's Stone?
Yup.
From eating pea?
Yes.
Eating lots of pea?
Yes.
Immortality sounds gross.
It does, but if you want to be immortal...
Ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Nope.
Even if lunch is pea.
That's enough. Some of these ancient texts even talked about creating manna from gold. When manna was extracted from gold, it could be used to make objects lighter, for levitation. Now, think about it. The Ark is a box almost 4 feet long and 3 feet wide. It's made of gold. Gold is heavy. The Ark of the Covenant also contained the 10 Commandments, which were carved into stone tablets. Stone is heavy. Just the gold would have weighed almost 1,000 pounds. That doesn't include the weight of the stone or the acacia wood. Yet it only took 4 men to carry it. By the way, the men who carried the Ark were Levites. Levite. Levitation.
Ark of the Covenant, link below.
The Knights Templar also found very old texts that even predated the civilization of Atlantis. These documents spoke of a non-human race that enslaved humanity thousands of years ago to mine gold.
Anunnaki!
Yahtzee. The Anunnaki come up a lot on this channel, and I promise I'll do a full episode on them, but here's the short version. The Anunnaki were gods worshipped by the ancient Sumerians, but they were actually aliens from a planet beyond Neptune called Nibiru. The Anunnaki arrived on Earth about 450,000 years ago, searching for resources, specifically gold. They were trying to solve an atmospheric crisis on their planet. Now, finding gold in abundance, they settled on Earth and established mining operations. Eventually, the Anunnaki created a labor force by genetically modifying early human ancestors, accelerating the evolution of Homo sapiens.
We need this episode, Chief.
I know, we'll do it, I promise.
Yeah. Your promises and $60 are worth about 1 night's worth of mana.
Okay. So, the Templars knew about the Anunnaki and how they converted gold into a powder used for healing, levitation, and generating electricity. And it wasn't just the Atlanteans and Israelites that knew about manna. Sumerian texts spoke of an alchemical science called Graal, which you can't help but notice is similar to the word grail. The Sumerians used a substance called shimana that was used to help the Anunnaki gods power their flying craft. In Vedic, Hindu, and Jain texts, this substance was called vimana, which again was used to power flying crafts. Polynesian cultures believe mana is a force of nature anyone can extract. Buddhists call it mani. Though the words vary slightly in all these cultures, the definition and use are the same. Mana is a potent substance that allows humanity to tap into something very powerful in nature. By the way, the Templar cross, you can find that carved everywhere and every time civilization existed. The cross is all over ancient Egypt. You can even see the cross carved on the ancient Sumerian depictions of the Anunnaki. Templar legend says this was actually the symbol of Atlantis. After Atlantis was destroyed in the Great Flood,
Of the Young Dryas.
Yep, the Templar legend of Atlantis and the Great Flood is exactly like every other flood myth we find in every culture around the world. After the flood, a few survivors restarted civilization with knowledge from Atlantis. The cross was carved in their honor. But not everything the Knights found was Atlantean. Some artifacts were from just 1,000 years before, during the time of Jesus. There were ancient texts that confirmed a lot of what was said in the Bible. But some texts contradicted the Bible. There was no way the Knights could let the church find out what they discovered. The Catholic Church was growing more powerful every year. If the truth came out, it could shake the very foundation of the faith, and the Knights Templar would be destroyed. Besides, much of the Knights' funding came from the church. But no historical document compared to the shock of what they discovered next, an ossuary, which is a collection of bones. This ossuary held the bones of a very famous religious family, all buried together. The Knights found the bones of Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, and Jesus himself. But they also found the bones of the children Mary had with both of them. To call what the Knights Templar discovered blasphemous would be a huge understatement. They discovered documents and artifacts that would literally destroy the church. They needed to keep these treasures safe from being destroyed. They needed to keep them from falling into the wrong hands, specifically the Pope's hands. The Templars knew that the existence of the bones of John, Jesus, and Mary Magdalene and their children would mean the end of the Catholic Church. But to rub salt in an already gaping wound, the Templars found something potentially even more threatening to the church, an alternate belief system. The Templars were Christian, but not in the strictest sense, as most of Europe was, and more importantly, as their king and employers were. Spreading information contrary to the teachings of the Catholic Church was not only heresy, it was a death sentence. Remember, this was all happening at the time of the Crusades. Religions were at war. The Templars couldn't speak about their findings, but couldn't ignore them either. So instead, they hid them, they protected them, and studied them. Some ancient wisdom included blasphemous ideas like the divine feminine, reincarnation, heaven as a state of mind, and an innate connection to the Creator. The Knights maintained their appearance as devout Catholics. They had to. Their biggest patron was the Catholic Church. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially the most powerful hand on earth. But in secret, the Knights Templar were Christian Gnostics. Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning divine knowledge. Other cultures call this enlightenment. The basic premise is that spirituality can be found within, without needing an outside institution. So no reason to have priests, monks, saviors, or churches at all. You didn't need them to find God. He's already within you. One of the earliest Templar documents mentions God-given rights. Now, Americans use this phrase, or something close to it, in the Declaration of Independence, but that was in the 18th century. The idea of God-given rights during the time of the Templars meant excommunication or worse. Only the Roman Church could give someone rights. Any alternative was bad for business. And instead of worshiping Jesus, many Knights Templar idolized John the Baptist, who they believe initiated Jesus into Gnosticism in the Great Pyramid. To the Templars, Jesus represented a Christos, a universal consciousness anyone could access, similar to the Buddha. They learned that being born again didn't refer to baptism. It referred to reincarnation, which someone would literally be born again. With the bones of Jesus, sacred documents, and artifacts from an ancient civilization, the Templars had plenty of evidence to back up their beliefs. They wanted to share this knowledge, but it wasn't the right time. The church was too powerful. They would have to wait. They would wait until this knowledge could be shared with the entire world and not seized by one pope or one king. So after years of digging, these early knights returned to Europe with the treasures and knowledge and hid it. And then they built an empire. For 200 years, the Knights Templar grew and thrived. Their numbers increased from a handful of soldiers to tens of thousands of men and women. The Catholic Church and Christian lords throughout Europe gave the Knights Templar money, land, and power to help their cause. The Templars created cathedrals, power structures, and systems of democracy. They created the first banking system, a system we still use today. During the Dark Ages, the journey from Europe to Jerusalem was dangerous. Road agents were robbing the pilgrims of everything they had. So the Knights Templar set up locations along the way called commanderies. At any one of these locations, you could deposit your gold in exchange for a note. You then take this note to another commandery and exchange it for gold. And for every transaction, the Knights Templar charged a small fee. It was an ingenious system used by thousands of people for hundreds of years. Over time, those little fees added up. Now, individually, the knights were poor. When joining, you gave all your wealth to the order. The order then took care of you and all its members. The treasures and knowledge passed from generation to generation, with each Grand Master responsible for their safekeeping. And for those few hundred years, the Knights Templar were extremely successful at distracting the church from their true purpose. A little too successful. Eventually, the Knights Templar had their own armies, their own fleets of ships. They had their own merchants, masons, and farmers. They were independent and self-sustaining. The Knights Templar became the first multinational corporation. They had no need for a king or country. In fact, the opposite happened. The Knights Templar were so wealthy that King Philip of France was borrowing money from them. In the fall of 1307, King Philip IV needed financing for another war. He wasn't going to borrow any more money from the Knights. Instead, he would take it from them. The Templars had gone from humble defenders of Christianity to a serious threat to the entire power structure of Europe, the king and the church. And like many powerful rulers, King Philip didn't tolerate threats. So Philip and Pope Clement V devised a plan. Pope Clement, by the way, was born Raymond Bertrand and was a childhood friend of the king. When the previous pope died in 1304, King Philip made sure his friend was elected to what was one of the most powerful seats of power on earth. In short, the Pope owed him one. On Friday the 13th of October 1307, 100 Templars, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were arrested. For 7 years, they were threatened and tortured to try to gain access to their knowledge and wealth. After making false confessions, they were found guilty of heresy and sentenced to death. But now, there's a plot twist. For centuries, history claimed the Church had condemned the Knights Templar as heretics and eventually had them executed. But in 2001, a document was found in the Vatican secret archives. It's called the Chinon Parchment. The Chinon Parchment documented the inquiry led by 3 cardinals appointed by Pope Clement V. It details the investigation and the charges against the Templar leaders, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay. The Chinon Parchment reveals that the Pope absolved the Templar leaders of heresy. They were allowed to reconcile with the Church. The Pope would allow the Order of the Knights Templar to continue their work. King Philip didn't like this result. He applied pressure to the Pope. Remember, the Pope owed him one. So in 1312, Pope Clement officially disbanded the Knights Templar. The leaders of the order, including Jacques de Molay, were later burned at the stake on charges of heresy, even though they were forgiven of these crimes. But Grand Master Jacques de Molay would enact a small token of revenge for this betrayal of justice. As he slowly burned to death, Molay issued a curse to the Pope and the King of France. He promised them that they would be dead within a year. This was March of 1314. A few weeks later, Pope Clement was dead. According to one account, while lying in state, he was struck by lightning. The fire was so intense that his body was unrecognizable. And if you read up on this pope, you'll agree that this was divine justice. In November, King Philip had a stroke and died. He was 46 years old. The Templar curse was fulfilled. France had now lost its king and its pope, and Europe had lost their beloved knights, or so it seemed. When the arrest order was given on October 13th, the Knights Templar knew it was coming. They had spies everywhere they had known for weeks, and they used those weeks to plan. On October 12th, the night before the arrest order was given, the Templars' entire fleet of ships disappeared into the darkness. And aboard those ships were all the ancient Atlantean artifacts, the holy treasures, and forbidden documents. Jacques de Molay and about 100 knights stayed behind. They hoped they could reason with the king and the pope. They failed in that mission, but succeeded in another. Disbanded but not destroyed, in hiding but not in prison, the Templars formed into smaller groups. They assimilated into other orders. Some assumed new identities and disappeared altogether. The Knights Templar in name ended in 1312, but their mission continued. In fact, it continues today. The evidence is everywhere. Evidence of the Knights Templar can be found all over the world. After they disbanded, they were determined to keep their knowledge and traditions alive, so they created alias groups to avoid detection. In Scotland, they became Freemasons. Portugal, they were known as the Knights of Christ. In Germany, they created Rosicrucianism. There's also evidence of them in the early Americas. Nova Scotia has the legendary Oak Island, with buried Templar treasure and deadly curses. An indigenous tribe in Panama, known as the White Indians of Darien, have pale skin and Caucasian features. Some believe they're descendants of the first Templars in the Americas. When asked about the Knights Templar, the natives called them our brothers. In early Europe, Templars were the first Vikings. The first pirates were Knights Templar. The famous skull and crossbones symbol, the Jolly Roger, that flag was first flown by the Templar Navy to frighten their enemies before battle. One of the most famous Templar symbols is the red cross with a white background. Another is the depiction of several knights on a horse, like this statue in London. Both of these are found in cathedrals and chapels all across Europe. If you read or saw the Da Vinci Code, you may remember Roslin Chapel in Scotland. Pagan and Templar symbols are on every inch of it. Some, like this carving of a knight on horseback, are obvious. This is the gravestone for William Sinclair. It's in the lower part of Roslin Chapel. It specifically says Knight Templar. William Sinclair had no love for the church and provided help to any Knights Templar who asked for it. But it's not just crosses and horses that the Knights engraved on their architecture. There are more subtle clues relating to some of their Gnostic and sometimes pagan beliefs. Sculptures of angels in strange positions are common in Roslin Chapel and are an important rite in Freemasonry. But Freemasonry wasn't supposed to have started until 1717. Roslin Chapel was built in 1446. Over 100 of these little green men are scattered around Roslin Chapel. They're pagan symbols and thought to originate from ancient Celtics. Paganism simply refers to anything that isn't Christian, Muslim, or Jewish. Why would there be hundreds of non-Christian symbols in a Catholic church? Templar legend says they were placed there as a message. Some of the more interesting carvings are of plants that Europeans never should have known about. This is a picture of corn over one of the windows in Roslin Chapel, and here's one of trillium. But corn and trillium are native to North America. Roslin Chapel was built almost 50 years before Columbus sailed to the New World. How would Templars know what these plants look like? Well, isn't it obvious? They were there first. Templar legend says Sir Henry Sinclair, grandfather of the builder of Roslin Chapel, was not only a Templar, but was among the first Europeans to visit the New World. Not only that, but Christopher Columbus himself was associated with the Knights. He was a distant relative of the Sinclairs. Columbus's daughter